this is probably one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting part of this entire discussion.
What if it's not just about quantizing the gravitational field or geometrizing the quantum, as Eric Weinstein says? What if it's about something else as well? What if there is a superforce, a force of unification that somehow combines all four forces, given that the force of gravity is acceptable as a force and not just a space-time curvature and so forth. And this superforce could be, for example, Isaac Newton. Let's go back to way before, all right, circa 1693 AD. Thank goodness for that. 1693, he writes a letter to one of his buddies, I think Sir Richard Bentley. He says, what if gravity is the result of an agent, big A, capital A, that acts constantly throughout the universe in accordance to given laws of nature? And my question is, what if this agent, capital A, is the superforce? Now, Professor Abai Ashtekar, which by the way, I think quantum bounds should be called Ashtekar bounds in the LQG and loop quantum gravity.
Did you hear that? He said that Isaac Newton, who was widely regarded by many people, I'm not saying this is accurate, but as is the smartest person to ever live. He was a polymath to a degree that we just do not, we almost don't even have today. We might not even have today, actually. I don't think we do. And he writes to his friend in 1690 that he thinks gravity is the result of an agent. He says capital A agent. Okay? And what this means is God. Okay? And what's interesting about this is, well, listen.
Maybe from ignorance or lack of knowledge.
We'll listen one more time, real quick. I wrote this down almost word for word in 2018. That I had this an epiphany about gravity and God, and basically exactly what Isaac Newton wrote. And but people take this. I'm not calling myself Isaac like on the level of Isaac Newton. I'm not. My IQ is probably way off from his. I mean, who knows? It could be like 100 points off. Maybe his IQ might be, more than Chris Langan's probably. So I'm not claiming that because Isaac Newton said this, I am so brilliant. I actually think it's a profoundly simple idea. I'll explain how I came to it in a minute. But I agree with this, and but the reaction to this statement in this interview is very interesting. It's kind of exactly what I expected, but not what I was hoping for. But one more time while I find my exact clip or quote.
Little, maybe from ignorance or lack of knowledge deep within physical theory, but what if it's not just about quantizing the gravitational field or geometrizing the quantum, as Eric Weinstein says? What if it's about something else as well? What if there is a superforce, a force of unification that somehow combines all four forces, given that the force of gravity is acceptable as a force and not just a space-time curvature and so forth? And this superforce could be, for example, Isaac Newton. Let's go back to way before, all right, circa 1693 AD. Thank goodness for that. 1693, he writes a letter to one of his buddies, I think Sir Richard Bentley. He says, what if gravity is the result of an agent, big A, capital A, that acts constantly throughout the universe in accordance to given laws of nature. And my question is, what if this agent, capital A, is the superforce? Now, Professor Abai,
Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant, 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 brilliant. So, I wrote this in 2018, and I think I also wrote it in 2017 and also 2019. I just wrote it in a bunch of different ways. It's in my phone notes. It says, gravity might be the most obvious evidence of a conscious action by existence, aka God. Conscious action by existence as a totality, meaning God. Gravity is space-time existence / God consciously bending to create, is what I had said. And kind of like when you bend, okay, you move your arm, you bend your fingers, you bend your arm, you bend your legs, you bend everything that you do to do anything is a bend, okay? You are the space-time of your cells, and you bend. And gravity looks like it is, space-time bending. But the reason why I had come to this idea is that I looked at the universe and I was like, okay, this was before I was like a really like committed theist. And I said, or I guess maybe not, but it wasn't, my thoughts on it weren't so organized in a physics scientific context, I guess. And I was like, if God exists, where is there evidence? What would be evidence of God? And people will look all the time to like the fine tuning and all kinds of stuff, which I think is just actually not the best evidence, even though it might be evidence. It's not the best evidence. But I looked at the universe and I was like, where can I see God's action? If he's acting, then where is he acting? And I was like, okay, so where does creation begin? If life and humans and cells and molecules and all of these things exist, where does this all start? Well, it starts with gravity. From our perception, at least, like this was my thought, that gravity is pushing matter together to eventually cause a fusion reaction that then results in a star that then explodes and has a bunch of elements, spread throughout the universe that then can go on to evolve. And this is also, a continuous thing, because you look at the universe and you see gravity is pushing things together. It's holding us here, and it's pushing. It's keeping planets and stars together, which you need in order to have the evolution all the way to us. And so I was like, what if gravity is God's constant action? And it's not just the result of a particle of subatomic particles like gravitons or something. And this made a lot of sense with the idea of dark matter as well, because dark matter, they just call it dark matter, but nobody knows what it is, and they're expecting to find particles that are super small or something like that, and that explain this extra gravitational energy in the universe that's holding everything together and pulling and when you look at the matter that we can observe in the universe, it's obvious. It appears to be that, I don't want to say it's obvious, I didn't calculate it, but it appears that there's more gravity than there is matter to explain it, and that implies that there's force coming from something else. And if it's not just little thus far invisible subatomic particles, which it's not, then it is gotta be maybe the super particle, the super force that is God, and if you think about your cells and you're like, okay, this cell is attached to this cell with this amount of energy, and this cell is attached to this cell with this amount of energy, and it pulls this cell together with this amount of energy, you add it all up, and you would be like, almost isn't enough energy maybe to explain why things are moving in your body a certain way. Because when you move your arm, it's not your cells that are making the decision. So it's not their individuated action that can explain why so much movement is happening, even though you can perceive the movement. But you are moving, and therefore your cells are moving more than they would individually move. So, according to their individuated, goals within you. And so I thought about this a lot, and I do believe it. I think that gravity is God's constant, conscious, intentional action. He's pushing or things together by bending himself. And this is all. It was cool to also see that this was a thought that was shared by Isaac Newton and also shared by Salvatore Pais. And it's funny because I've talked about this before. I have like words like super literal, and I think like Chris Langan and others have words that start with super, and there's superposition and stuff like that as you get more into these metaphysics, these area of metaphysics. And I've said before that quantum physics is not physics. It's a different field than than general relativity and thermodynamics and all kinds of that stuff. Like it's different than relativistic physics. It's not even the same field. So the attempt to unify it is not going to happen in the way that most people think, and that in order to unify it, you need basically God. And so what is really interesting, though, is that Salvatore Pais is saying exactly what sentient singularity theory says. And to prove it, I'll show you. He says, what if the four fundamental forces in physics, if you assume gravity is a force, gravity, strong force, weak force, electromagnetism, are only unified within them being contextualized around or within a super force, he calls it. I say super literal, superposition, like there's supersymmetry, now there's super force. This always implies you're dealing with metaphysics. Quantum physics is metaphysics. It's not relativistic physics. But this he says that these four forces are united under this super force. And he said, what if this agent, capital A agent, meaning being, okay, God, okay, I don't know if he would like that word, that language, but what else is it? It's an agent with agency that you're going to capitalize. Okay, sounds like God to me. This being is the super force that is responsible for the unification of all of these other forces.